Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest in the TeleWare webinar series, where we've been covering a range of topics around employee mobility and productivity and what businesses can do to address the challenge of productivity stagnation. Today's webinar is titled How to Create a Mobile-First People Strategy to Modernise Employment, and it's called this for a number of reasons, but mainly because it's so important that we understand and reflect the changing employee expectations that are out there in the marketplace. So I'm going to go on to some introductions. My name is Mark Elwood and I'm the Marketing Director here at TeleWare, and I'm hosting today's session. And I've been joined by two esteemed colleagues from TeleWare. First of all, we've got Steve Howarth, who's our CEO.
Hi, Steve. Good morning.
Morning. And also, for those regular viewers of our webinars, you'll recognise Andrew Fawcett, who's a Product Manager here at TeleWare.
Good morning.
Hi, Andrew. So my next point that I was going to mention is that we've got a few things just to pick up on. First of all, there's some functionality for you to be able to ask questions as we go along today, so I would really encourage you to do so. The questions are completely anonymous. There's only the guys here on the panel who can see them. So ask away, and I won't read any names out, but I would encourage you to do that. And we've got about 45 minutes for today's session. So. Today, we're going to talk about why it's important to have a robust, flexible working policy in place that is viewed by employees as being accessible and meaningful, and why thinking about creating mobility-enabled people strategies could be crucial to your future growth. At TeleWare, we believe in the importance of technology in helping customers thrive and creating a modern workplace that empowers employees to do more. Technological advancements have had and continue to transform the workplace and working culture. And I think that in the past few years, we've really seen a seismic shift in expectations around flexible and mobile working. So with that in mind, what we've done recently at TeleWare is we commissioned a piece of research to explore the attitudes to flexible working in the UK. We asked 2,000 employees a number of questions, and they've unearthed some really interesting findings, which I'm going to talk about now. So the first question we asked in our research was, how important is it to you to be able to choose the hours you work and where you work from? And the results were quite interesting. So 87% of respondents said that it was either very important or somewhat important to be able to choose the hours and where they work from. So, fine, so we understand that it's important. But then we asked if they had or would they ever turn down a job because of a lack of flexible working at that company. So 25% of respondents said, yes, I have done in the past. 31% said they haven't, but they would do if that situation arose. And 43% said, no, I haven't, and I wouldn't. So, fine. But then when we dig a little bit deeper into that, it starts to unearth some interesting findings. So when we look at it by age categories, so the younger age categories, so the 16s to 24s, the 25s to 34s, we see that around 40% of those age categories have already, in their relatively early working careers, already turned down a position because it doesn't offer flexible working. When you get to the older age category, so 55 plus, only about 8% of those have ever turned down a position because of lack of flexible working. So there's some quite significant differences there. And then conversely, those that are answering no, I haven't and I wouldn't, is just over, well, it's about 24% for the 16 to 24s and 25% for the 25 to 34s. But yet that goes up to a massive 55% for the 45 to 54 age category, and even higher at 62% for the 55 plus. So I think that in itself is very interesting, that there are some quite significant variances by age category. And then similarly, when we look at it by industry type, what we can see is that again, some big differences here. So HR, for example, 58% of HR people have said they have already rejected a position based on lack of flexible working, but that goes down to about 11% for legal. So again, interesting that we're seeing some quite significant variances there. So with that in mind, Steve, I want to bring you in now. So it's all very interesting, but What is it? What does flexible working look like for employees and for employers today?
Yeah, so I mean, flexible working really falls into several categories. So you've got things like flexible hours, flexible days, or flexible location. So if you look at things like flexible hours, they're quite common in cities. So it's a classic example where people are looking to avoid the rush hour commute. So we can see that quite often, coming an hour late, leave an hour early, or coming an hour early and leave an hour late. Flexible days have been helpful for all sorts of reasons, but things like returning parents, so it might be that you share the workload of picking up your kids on a certain day, or taking a Friday off, or whatever that might be. So it's having the flexibility about which days you work is quite important. Annualised hours are more common. Typically they've been common in manufacturing in the past, where they're trying to balance supply and demand, but interestingly we've seen those start to appear in professional services jobs, which might be more around project-based sessions. So you might be 3 months working on a project, then you might have a month off, rather than specific annualised hours, as an example. And then you come into the flexible location. I think that's where there's really the massive opportunity to get some productivity benefits out. And by flexible location, a lot of people jump straight to that working from home piece, but there's working at multiple locations and actually being more mobile and working on the go. And that really, if you think about it, you're then not commuting, so you're alleviating some of that travel time entirely, or you enable people to work whilst they're commuting. And then finally, we're seeing a rise of the gig economy, which is kind of taking that flexibility to a whole new level.
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. Andrew, I want to bring you in here. So what are you seeing around kind of the uptake around flexible working?
Well, flexible working's been sort of waiting in the wings for a number of years, although it's not been particularly new. It's not really been in vogue. In 2014, it became backed by regulatory responsibility for employers to not reasonably refuse flexible working. So all businesses, or virtually all businesses, now need to have policies in place to accommodate flexible working requests. In practice, though, research shows that the uptake of flexible working, firstly, it varies hugely from sector to sector. And overall, the figures are a little disappointing. We haven't sort of seen that uptick in flexible working as a result of it being sort of embodied in the regulation now. There's a study by Manchester University which, in the year following the 2014 regulations, it showed very low levels of uptake, only a couple of percentage points, in fact, following the year afterwards. And when they dug into the reasons for that, it was a combination of low levels of awareness amongst employees and quite a degree of scepticism on the part of senior management and employers. And it was quite interesting just sort of reading around this, that there was a piece published in, I think it was the Civil Service News, that said Michael Gove was in a cabinet meeting.
Oh, really?
And a cabinet source told the paper, Michael said they work 37 hours a week and then they go home, even if that is Wednesday afternoon, while another source said Gove went on a rant and said something along the lines of, do the civil service still work 12 hours and get 2 days off? And the PM Riley replied, it's called flexible working, Michael, and we as a government support it. So it's quite interesting to sort of see, even at the high levels of government, employers are not always sort of embracing flexible working. So it's about lack of awareness amongst employees and some scepticism on the part of employers. And even more recent research continues to bear this out, citing high levels of stigma associated with flexible working and line manager attitudes positively dissuading its adoption. Saying all of that, on a more positive note, many forward-thinking organisations, and PwC are a very good example, who in August 2018, they put in something called the Flexible Talent Network. You may have seen this, it got quite a lot of media coverage at the time. And this allows candidates to apply to work at PwC purely on their skill set and a working pattern that best suits their lifestyle, rather than having to apply for a specific job role. So potential employees can apply to work shorter hours or just for a few months of the year instead of working every month. And then PwC then matches applicants to relevant projects within its business. It's very early days, and it's too early to say whether this pretty radical approach has been successful in its aim of attracting new and more diverse applicants into key roles. But I would expect we'll see other similar initiatives in sectors that have particularly been bitten by skill shortages and poor productivity growth going forward.
Right. Okay. So I just want to take a step back to something you said earlier, which is around the uptake of flexible working and some of the disappointing stats that we're seeing, because we asked about this in the survey that I referred to earlier, and we asked respondents if their employer operates a flexible working scheme. So 29% of people said yes for everybody. 20% said yes, but only for a certain level of seniority. 26% said yes. 26% said yes on request, and 22% said no, they don't. So that for me actually kind of substantiated some of the points that you were making earlier. One about the uptake, but also the perceived availability of flexible working. What's the legal position on this?
Well, in legal terms, flexible working has to be offered to all workers. It's pretty straightforward in that respect, and there's nothing in the legislation talks about levels of seniority. So I think you're right there, Mark. I think there's a perception thing. So flexible working can allow employees to change the number of hours they work, change the times when they work, or work from other locations. And the legislation introduces this idea of a statutory request for flexible working. And all employees are entitled to make a statutory request after 6 months of employment, and they can make one in every 12 months period, should they wish. Now, from the employer's standpoint, the employer must give serious consideration to all requests and complete the process of approval or denial of the request within 3 months. Most importantly, it's on employers not to unreasonably withhold requests for flexible working or to treat employees less favourably as a result of them requesting or undertaking flexible working. So given that, there are one or two sort of get-outs in there as well. So certain classes of employment are exempt from the requirement, and consideration needs to be given to a number of factors, such as whether flexible working will bring on extra costs for the business, whether it will affect quality of performance, whether businesses might have trouble meeting customer demand due to flexible working arrangements, or if there's a plain lack of work to do during the proposed working time. So there isn't a lot of data on this, but clearly some organisations who are less sort of open to the flexible working agenda, that there are a number of, if you like, stock defences for actually rejecting or refusing flexible working. And it'll be interesting to sort of see the way that those are used going forward and whether any cases come to appeal.
Yeah, I think I've just gone back to that slide for a second, because I do think some of the numbers are quite powerful there. So you've got 42% of people saying that they either work for an organisation where it's not available at all, or it's based on seniority, which is clearly not reflecting the letter of the law. So there are employees, but also employers are potentially missing out on some advantages that flexible working provides. What sort of things are they missing out on?
Well, at a very sort of global level, there was a survey recently by Vodafone that indicated in the UK alone, total savings of up to £34 billion could be made by UK businesses by freeing up desk space and working flexibly. But it's important just to go back to the point that was made earlier. It's not just about working from home. It's working from wherever you need to be. That might be on a client site, from a cafe, or a hotel, or even during your commute. And making best use of the available technology such as audio and video conferencing and mobile collaboration apps. This can be achieved in a way that doesn't detract from meaningful collaboration between employees who aren't physically working together. There's a lot of mention made around employees achieving this better work-life balance through flexible working, and that's one of the sort of key drivers to help lower stress levels and increase quality of output. But I think it must be noted also that flexible working itself could, in certain circumstances, increase employee stress by being always available. And I think it's important from an employer's standpoint that they help employees move into different modes of working. For the employer, it can mean attracting and retaining the best employees and extending the recruitment reach into new areas. And the PwC example that I quoted earlier with its flexible talent network, that was the key driver. They have chronic skill shortages in many professional services business, and this really, from the employer's standpoint, was put forward as a means to attract a whole new breed of employees into the workplace.
Wonderful, and some really interesting points there. Steve, I'm going to bring you in here because I'd like to know, well, I should already know, but what is it that TeleWare are doing around the flexible working piece?
So we're doing a number of things. We're quite flexible as an organisation in that respect. I mean, all our employees now have laptops as opposed to desktop PCs as one example of, so that everybody's able to work outside of the office, which hasn't just helped us in terms of employee mobility, but also if you're doing disaster recovery planning, etc., then everybody can just carry on business as usual. We offer flexible working, but with smaller core hours, so people can arrive early or work late if they wish. We also there's some areas that work more flexibly than others. So obviously, if people are home-based or working out and about, then they're absolutely flexible. And there are pockets of areas where people wish to trial systems. So we're in one area at the moment, for example, people are looking at what does having a member of staff working at home feel like for the rest of the team, and just trialing it and measuring the positives and the negatives, not just for the person who's working outside of the office, but the impact on their team. And the feedback's been pretty positive so far.
And I think I do, being an employee here at TeleWare, I do definitely see that there's, not everything works every time. So we start trialing it and improving it and trying something different.
Yeah.
And then more generally, what are your perceptions around kind of what's out there in the market from an employee or an employer perspective?
Well, I mean, the benefits more generally, the employees, it means more control over when and where they work, and so they, as Andrew mentioned earlier, they can actually integrate their work-life balance much better. But I think from employers, the financial impact of mobility itself is just quite staggering. I've read a stat from Forbes which quoted that employee mobility leads to 30% better processes, 23% more productivity, and 100% more satisfied employees. I mean, you look at those stats and you go, as a business owner of any organisation, you just can't ignore those kind of figures anymore.
So picking up on that bit, then I think that's particularly interesting, because it's fine looking at flexible working, but there's got to be that business benefit there. So how do we draw that link between flexible working and productivity improvements? I'm going to actually come to you, Andrew, if that's all right on that.
Yeah, so if you look at modern business, then business opportunities can be won or lost in a matter of minutes. And having a base of employees who can work from anywhere at any time and who aren't tied to their desks really benefits businesses of all sizes to be more responsive to an increasingly sort of dynamic business environment. This in itself can generate productivity gains. For example, in the time taken to acquire and win a new customer can be greatly shortened by accelerating those processes by having people available to some extent on tap. And you've seen the businesses that can offer this level of agility having distinct advantage over their competitors. Also, with flexible working in place, businesses are able to offer better customer experience. They're able to offer extended hours of service. They're able to offer improved SLAs and service levels to the clients as well.
Interesting. Thanks, Andrew. So I actually want to take a second to go back to the survey. So the reason for that is that I'm going to come on to talk about technology in a second. And within the survey, we asked people what devices their employer provides them with to enable them to work flexibly. So looking at some of the stats that came out of that, so almost half of respondents said they get a laptop. 40% are provided with a business mobile, and almost a quarter get a tablet. Then it gets quite interesting around kind of the use of own devices. So 12% of people use their own personal mobile for business purposes. And then we see new technology come into effect. So 7% have got a smartwatch. And then when I dug a little bit deeper into some of those stats, as you might expect, there is some variance between age categories. So in the 16 to 24 and the 25 to 34, that rose to about 12 or 13%. And then, well, for the over 45s and the over 55s, that dropped to about 1%. So age-wise, there's some bit variances in there. But then also it looks like there's certain industries that are leading the march on bringing new technology in. So when we looked at IT professionals, okay, you might expect them to be a little bit ahead of the curve there. So there are about 16% of those who are using smartwatches. But 15% of architects and 11% of legal professionals are using smartwatches for work purposes, which I thought was quite interesting, though they were seeing the rise of some of those new technologies coming to fore. So Andrew, how are you seeing technology influence flexible working?
Well, it's largely about opening up new ways in which people can collaborate while working remotely. So desktop video conferencing has been around for a while and continues to get increasing adoption as it becomes sort of a standard feature that people almost expect to be in place. And what you're seeing as well is many sort of standard Office applications, Office 365, including options for collaborative working, so allowing people to jointly work on a document or presentation from remote locations, things like team messaging and access to office-based systems now. So previously things like CRM and ERP systems were largely office-based and you had to be physically in an office to access them. You're now seeing these applications open up to mobile apps. By and large, so they're accessible from mobile phones from any location. So basically, it's about making it easier and frictionless to work at any time from any location. And interestingly, these technologies are also changing the way collaboration happens as well, because they make it a lot easier for you to involve your customers and your suppliers in ad hoc collaboration sessions without the cost, inconvenience and stress associated with travel.
I'm going to bring you in, Steve, up to that point as well. So what technology advancements are you seeing?
Well, I actually found the slide really interesting when you put that up, that 12% of people are using their own devices for work, because we've done some other research in and around some of the bring your own device pieces, and from that research more than 50% said that they wanted to use their own technology. So I was finding it quite interesting. Only 12% actually are, so there's a bit of a gap there, and I think that's going to grow, because I mean, if you think about it, technology enabling people to be more productive whilst mobile and location independent has been around for a long time now, but I think they were often hampered by having poor connectivity or relied on technologies that were provided by the business and people just didn't carry around with them, so they didn't have them on hand to use. And I think that's changing. And I think that's partly one of the trends is people now have technology that's far and away better than most of the technology provided to them by business. I know when I first entered the workforce, I didn't have some of the technologies that was laptops provided by work. Then you went through this process of you did have them at home, but they weren't as top of the range as you'd get provided by work. Now you've got these stunning smartphones with more power than what sent people to the moon early doors. So there's been that complete change around of employees having better electronics of their own than the companies are providing them. And I think that whilst can be scary for some employers, the opportunity on the back of that is massive to be able to enable those devices and enable the people while they're more mobile. So I do see that starting to happen now with bring your own device schemes is the obvious way that's starting to emerge. You can just see that getting more traction as we go along.
And so thinking about going along, Andrew, what do you see the future looking like?
Well, I think one of the sort of major considerations now, we can almost, as Steve says, take some of the technology can be sort of taken for granted, whether it's supplied by the employee themselves and the software piece is there. But perhaps the major constraint that I see with flexible working is actually more cultural. So historically, employer and employee relationships were based largely on sort of presenteeism, where you were rather than what you did in that sense. But I think sort of employee relationships based on presenteeism will start to look a little bit like fax machines fairly soon. The modern relationship really is about outcomes, and it doesn't really matter where an employee achieves those outcomes or over what hours he does or she does. It's really irrelevant. So the sort of change in employer-employee relationship in many respects coming through. But as with all fundamental changes, I think there'll be some new challenges for both employers and employees alike. And it's really important that there are openly agreed and understood boundaries between work and personal life, as well as the need for employers not simply to dump the technology and the tools on the employee, but to actively and proactively support them in adopting them with a great level of training and support. The other piece I think is important and coming through is the social impact of flexible working, and that shouldn't be underestimated. Many remote workers talk frequently about isolation and feeling sidelined when working from home as sort of key issues preventing the uptake of more flexible working. And employers will need to continue to foster opportunities for face-to-face activities, for team building, and maintaining the positive and really rich relationships which can spark innovation in close-knit physical teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think that isolation piece can be a major problem for people who are working outside of the office. And Steve, bringing you in, so what impact do you see technology having in the future?
Well, I think if you look at all networks, whether mobile or fixed, everywhere is just getting faster and faster, and the tools that are designed to take advantage of this are just becoming better. And I think that's going to lead to working outside of the office becoming a lot less frustrating than it has in the past. I also think that I touched on the bring your own device piece earlier, but I do believe that employees are becoming more technology literate at the same time that these technologies are becoming easier to use. So I think vendors are actually looking a lot more about how to make apps really very usable. It's a lot more consumerism driven in a way, so the user experience is becoming far more important and thought about. And that with the employees taking that ownership, I just think that has massive implications for IT teams inside of organisations. But what we're also seeing is that drive towards more wireless working. I just think that if it hasn't already, that will become the norm. And I think on the back of that, you mentioned the isolation, and then that doesn't necessarily mean, therefore, you should come into head office. I can see just the rise of and the popularity of the work hubs just continuing as people become more multi-locational rather than necessarily purely mobile, but they want that social interaction with people, whether or not they're actually their colleagues in the company they're at. So I think they're all going to be coming together in terms of it'll be quite a different dynamic in the future, and the technology will enable that.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. And I'd just like to thank anybody who's sent questions in so far. So we're going to come on to those in a little while. And just a little reminder for anybody else who's got any burning questions from anything that we've talked about so far, do send them in, and we will be answering those at the end of the session. Okay, so thanks for that, Steve. So building on that kind of technology bit, it'd be remiss of me to ask you, Andrew, what is it that TeleWare are doing in this space, and how are we helping organisations and employees to work more flexibly?
You know, nobody can sort of help miss the fact that desktop phones are getting a little dusty when you go around offices, and the actual device of choice. A mobile phone is used as much in an office as outside it. So we've spent a lot of time looking at this, and we've introduced a mobile app which is available now on the iOS and Android stores, called Recall, and it's really pretty straightforward. It eliminates the need for two mobile phones, so it allows your business number and your personal number to reside on a single device with a single SIM card, and that in turn brings some great advantages in terms of not having to carry about two devices, not having to carry two chargers as well, which are often even heavier and more cumbersome than the devices themselves. And we've put a lot of rich functionality in there that allows. We're talking earlier about work-life balance, so it allows the user to literally switch off the work number or redirect it to voicemail, for instance, when they're out of work mode. And we've also created completely distinct and separate address books, voicemail, contacts lists, recent calls for the personal and for the business calls. So it's enabling those employees that are using their own devices to actually get this real separation between work and personal life, but the real benefits of having a single device that the employee knows particularly what wants to and loves in that respect. Also has some significant environmental impacts that shouldn't be sort of overlooked. I think there's about 1.5 mobile phones for every person in the UK now in circulation, many of them in drawers, many of them sort of hitting landfill and things like that. And going forward, this really isn't good or sustainable for the environment. So the idea of sort of immediately reducing by half the number of devices that an employee needs to use and carry around has got to be a good thing for the environment as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm a potential employer, hypothetically speaking, an employer, and I'm really interested in what both of you have had to say today, and thinking that I can get more for my organisation out of introducing more flexible working policies. What are the 3 things that I should be considering? Andrew, I'm going to come to you first on that.
Okay. I think, as I mentioned earlier, flexible working, it's a lot more than issuing a few tablets or smartphones to your employees and then going to your employees and sort of saying, use them, fill your boots, really. Implemented properly, flexible working can really transform where, when and how people work. And because of this, it's really vital to align your flexible working strategy to your overall business objectives. And by doing this, you'll help ensure that your productivity goals are core to all of activities and ensuring senior executive buy-in. Obviously, the sort of Michael Gove case that I talked about earlier, without senior buy-in, it's going to be very, very difficult to implement these sort of fairly radical new ways of working. So you need to proactively educate your employees about how to be productive when working outside the office, including when to switch off and devote time to personal activities. The companies that we're working with in this area, many of them are beginning with sort of pilot schemes where objectives and outcomes can be easily measured and lessons learned and specific business issues can be shared and addressed before major commitments are made. It won't be all smooth. There will be issues. It's a fundamental change to the way people work. And there are very few areas of a business that won't be affected once you introduce flexible working. So it really needs stakeholder buy-in across the board and from the board. One particular element is that businesses need to get buy-in from older employees who perhaps are less comfortable with change, and with the stats that Mark showed earlier sort of indicates there's a real generational shift here, and you need to consider the needs and preferred ways of working of your older employees as well. And again, sharing experience and tips across teams, looking at it from both a line manager's perspective as well as the employee's perspective, because line managers still need to manage people, and managing people in remote locations can have its own challenges. So I'd say set expectations carefully. It may be necessary to prepare for a level of failure, and perhaps accept this as sort of part of the project journey, if you like. And then finally, I think it's really important to work with knowledgeable and supportive vendors, TeleWare being just one of those, who have the experience and insight from working with businesses across a wide range of industries, and we can help sort of bring that knowledge and experience and input into the fold.
Thanks, Andrew. And Steve, what advice would you give me?
Well, on top of what Andrew said, and to reiterate in some respects, I think it is really important to look at not just introducing these schemes, but really enabling the employees that are on these schemes to really perform. I mean, a lot of people look at flexible work schemes as cost savings, reducing office space and the likes, but there really is that opportunity to get some real productivity benefits out of these sorts of things. And I personally believe that employees that are working flexibly, whether that's flexible hours, flexible location or whatever, should not be disadvantaged in any way. So there isn't one size, my three things would be, there isn't one size fits all, so offer schemes that actually suit the employees, engage with them, ask them. Also, the second point would really be to include the managers and the rest of the team in that. As I said, that point earlier, it may be that by being too flexible that some of the team dynamic doesn't always work as well, and the manager's job role will change in the way they interact. So include management in that decision and the design of what you do there. And then finally, provide the necessary tools for mobile and remote workers. They are different requirements. They do need it easy, fast, simple. So by doing that, you'll get a good outcome. And of course, as Andrew said, come and talk to TeleWare. We have 26, 27 years experience of working in flexible and mobile working. So we've seen some of the examples that have come along in the past.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both very much for that. So I'm now going to come on to some questions that we've had during the course of the webinar today. So the first question is, and I think this is a particularly interesting one because it's about that kind of remote working thing that you touched on earlier, Andrew. So how best can engagement be boosted when mobile workers need to be out on the road for their role, but it means that their interactions are more with customers than with colleagues?
Yeah, it's a real problem, and I've seen this firsthand in a number of different organisations, that sort of challenge. I don't think there's any real sort of silver bullet to achieving that, but I think as an employer, talk to your employees, identify those employees who may be feeling that sort of level of lack of interaction and isolation in some ways. And I think it's good to think about sort of engineering situations, not just team building days and things like that, but to try and get sort of good quality face time with employees, with each other in a social or a business context, to help to sort of share those experiences and sort of talk about what flexible working means and fill in some of those gaps, because it will take away from some of the sort of things that we all take for granted in an office, and almost until you work, as I have in the past for sort of 5 or 6 years, in a home-based role, you really do feel absolutely the pain, and it is real pain of that lack of interaction. So I think employers need to foster those situations, basically, in which employees can get real quality face-to-face time in order to be able to work more effectively mobile and feel more comfortable in that role.
Yeah, I was at a research group last week, and one of the chaps that was in the group has a remote team, and they have a Friday call meeting where some of the people will get together physically if they can, but anybody who can't will be there videoed, but they'll literally have a video screen of that person represented in the meeting, and so it's a bit Brady Bunch and a bit kind of using technology, but I just thought it was quite a creative way of dealing with that. So another question that's come through is, and it was around recall. So someone's saying that they're not sure they would need an app because they they just use their personal phone for work purposes. So Steve, I'm going to ask you about that one. Is that a good idea? Does that negate the need for recall?
Well, I think there's two primary reasons why using your personal device without a second number isn't the best idea. And we've seen this a lot with the customers that we work with. As Andrew related to before, sometimes the added stress of working from home or always being contactable is a real issue. And if you're using your own mobile device for work, you're just 24/7 always contactable. So I think it's really important to be able to turn off business and send calls to voicemail and the likes when you don't want to receive those calls, but be still sociable with your friends on a weekend. And it's not just from a stress perspective, but there's quite often some health and safety issues in there as well. There is some jobs, by giving out your phone numbers to customers, can be a real health and safety and dangerous, hazardous situation. So it's not always a good piece there for the employee, as well as the employer as well. I think there's often this ownership of a phone number. People have had phone numbers for years when they join an organisation, and the last thing they want to do is give that up. But from an employer's perspective, the last thing they want is when that employee leaves, that all the business goes out the door with that employee. So there's that kind of that dichotomy sat there of ideas that if you actually have a second number over the top, that can remain a business phone number. The employee can keep their phone number, they can work on their own device, and you've separated work and life. So I think there's a pros for both employer and employee to do that.
Oh, they're separate. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we're starting to run out of time. So there's a couple of things I just wanted to wrap up. So the outtakes I've taken from today's session is, one, the market is changing, and we've given some examples of some of the more innovative organisations that are out there that are kind of leading the market on that. The person who's asked for some of the information around PwC, yeah, I'm happy to send some of that out, so I will do that. The other thing I took was that it's not a one-size-fits-all thing, so different people within any organisation are going to have different requirements, so it's about your flexible working being flexible. Test and learn and be consultative. So find out what your employees are interested in and put that in place, but be prepared for that to fail, and then don't retreat from it, but actually go forward from there on. There are benefits for both employers and for employees. So this shouldn't just be seen as a cost to the employer. Actually, embrace it, promote it, use it as a recruitment tool, and actually there's some significant benefits to be out there to be had, and enable employees to take advantage of the schemes, promote it within your organisation. Don't leave it kind of something that's hidden that they've got to go out and find. So wonderful, thank you very much, both of you. There's a couple of final little bits I just wanted to mention to the audience. So we've just released a white paper, and we're offering it exclusively to anybody who's joined the webinar today. So it's around productivity and a solution from a new generation. Could millennials be the answer we need to the UK's poor productivity? Hopefully you'll find that an interesting read. It's available on the channel here, so download it and read it and let us know what you think about that. The next thing I wanted to mention was our next webinar. It's an Ask the Expert session, and it's zooming in on recall and how to adopt a BYOD policy that will delight your employees with recall from TeleWare. So that's on the 5th of December. Do register for that if you can. And then just a couple of final points. Let us know what you thought of today's session. Give us some feedback. That's available on the Bright Talk page. And thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Thanks, Steve and Andrew. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Goodbye.